Good evening and welcome to Classic Car Restoration Club live Q&A, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm joined here with Ross Keel. We had our first rite of spring here. This weekend we pulled the engine on a Trans Am in a guy's driveway.
Outside.
When you're pulling an engine in Minnesota in March, it's a good year.
That's right.
That usually doesn't happen.
Starts off very well. Let's put it that way.
So we're kind of like pumped up. We're kind of starting to think car stuff at this point.
You bet.
And I know for Ross here, he's already thinking about what mods he's going to do to his Chevelle this year.
It's spring.
And like the wife's car here, we've got that we spent last winter putting in some wheel bearing. The rear wheel bearing went out on it on our very last cruise last fall. And it was making a little noise, so it was worth checking out. And of course, once we did dig into it, it was clearly it had problems.
It definitely had problems.
So it was good that we got that fixed. Where we're, went through a few things, kind of got it ready. There's always by the time I get to spring, there's always a couple more things that I wish I would have got done. But it's probably get to them later on in the year. We've got always seems to be a project somewhere.
Always. It's supposed to rain a few days here.
Yeah, anyway. We're supposed to get a couple days of rain, so that gives us a reason to actually get something else done.
That's right.
And I want to thank again. Thanks, guys, for joining us. Tonight, if you wanna, they're right below this box, right below the window here that you're watching us. There's on the Classic Car Restoration Club website. There's a box down there for messages. If you have any questions you want to ask. If you're watching on Facebook, feel free to type your questions in there. There's also a little chat button that's down in the corner. That's not necessarily for us. That's for if you want to talk to the member services department and resolve questions with your membership or whatever. So not that box. Just stay away from the chat one tonight. Just go down to the big orange box down below. Below that, there's also you can sign up for the Overdrive Newsletter. It's free. It kind of gives you a little bit of additional information that you may not get on the site, and kind of keeps you up to date with what's going on inside the club and what we're up to at least. So it's a free benefit. Go ahead, just sign up for it. It'll give you some regular helpful information, and also we pass along some tips and some other stuff there, and as well as, offers and unique opportunities. So go ahead, sign up for that, and let's get started. Like I said, if you have any questions, now's the time to ask. We've got some questions that first came in via through the email, and we want to get to those first. We have a member, Dave. Yes, I have a 65 F100 pickup. Eventually, I want to upgrade to disc brakes and I have all the information I need to do this. However, I've read about and seen a power brake booster that should work with the factory master cylinder, thereby giving me power brakes to begin with. However, I can't find any information on what or where I can get this booster. I'm all for bolt-on improvements. A 1965 F100 is going to be a single pot reservoir. There weren't a lot of power brakes units offered for the old single pots early on. Power brakes was a thing that kind of came along over time, but for the Ford specifically, like the 55, 67 Fords, begin to use what they call a Midland booster, and it's not attached to the to the master cylinder itself, it's in line. And the benefit of using a Midland booster like they had on the early baby T-Birds is that, you know, you can mount that thing away from the master cylinder. And a lot of street routers were big on these things for years, because you can mount it, you know, underneath the car. You can mount it someplace where it doesn't need to occupy the space where the master cylinder is. So it made it really useful, and it worked with a single pot master cylinder. That's the good thing. The bad thing is when you do upgrade, and you'll probably want to go to a dual reservoir, and you want to put in a power brakes again. It's not going to work with that. It's not. It's pretty much a one-shot kind of deal. So if you're planning to do the upgrade later on to dual reservoir, the master, and all of that, you know, I would you can always upgrade your disc brakes and all that stuff later on, but you can do the master cylinder and the power brake booster now. Of course, your car is going to be all drum, so you need to make sure you have residual pressure valves, and that'd be like a 10 or 12 pound psi residual pressure valve on both lines. But that's a small expense, and it'll make it easier for you to upgrade later. So my recommendation would be just to go in with a factory unit right now, or go with your upgraded brake booster and dual reservoir, because then you can have the safety aspects of that. Okay, where does Craig get his material that he uses for his videos? Tony asks. Craig is semi-retired right now. He does the videos, and but he's not really actively working day to day in the shop as much as he used to when he first did the video. But with that said, you know, most of his equipment, most of his supplies are coming from his local welding supply shop. And I think if you really want good materials for doing metal work, welding supply shop.
Yeah.
You know, it goes without saying, because, you know, that's where you're going to get the good, you know, you do things like, you know, grinding discs and stuff like that. Don't try to save a few pennies here and there. If you're going to spin something around 10,000 RPMs, you want to make sure it holds together and it's a good quality and it's going to work for you. As well as all your metal fabrication and welding supplies. And you'll be a lot happier spending money on good equipment, good tools, than you will, regretting why you didn't spend money on it. Let's see. Hank writes that he has a 1958 Ford retractable. He has one request, please. My question is, what type of switch was used and where was the placement of it? The car has a retractable. The car is a Ford retractable, and I have installed spotlights without handles and without control arms, and the switch. So the switch I will need will be in the bottom of the dash, and I have spots on both fenders. So one switch or two. Okay, so you've got obviously you've got a 58 Ford retractable with a pair of spotlights on it, you know, which were real popular back in the day, you know. And actually, a lot of customizers back in the 50s and early 60s, they had dummy spots. They had spotlights on the car, but they were never actually hooked to anything. And actually, in many ways, the way your car sounds, it's a lot like dummy spots because you can't control them. And you know, I can recall as a kid, there was always friends and people that had a spotlight on their car, and it was always like, ooh, that's kind of weird or cool.
Another toy we could play with.
But to operate them both on one switch. I guess that's a personal preference. And how would I do it? I'd probably run it. Because they're going to pull a lot of amperage. You don't want to run a lot through a fuse. Maybe run a relay and a couple of small toggle switches. You could, if because you're not going to use them for anything other than show pretty much at that point. Why not just put them all on one switch, and so when you hit them, they both come on, and have that kind of effect. It's a cool custom touch. Again, it wouldn't be factory, because the factory ones would have a handle. In some of these cars, they had elaborate handles that came way into the car, and
you could stand them.
Yeah. I watched your video about cleaning the contacts on a vehicle horn. Can a horn from a 6-volt vehicle be used with a 12-volt? Quick answer is yes. A lot of things that are 6-volt can work with 12. But I urge, on something like a horn, because it's just going to vibrate. Yeah. It's just an electromagnet that's going to break, and the contact going to break and come together repeatedly. But before you say, "Oh yeah, my horn's fine," because horn's not on that long. It's on. You're not going to go down the road, blaring your horn for 10 minutes at a time. Most times things like that, like starters, like 6-volt starter works fine on 12 volts. A 6-volt horn most times will work fine on 12 volts. But always try this stuff first. Don't just assume that, if make sure that you connect it up, try it for a short burst, make sure nothing's getting overheated, but for the most part, I have a 1935 Chevy that's all converted to 12 volt, and it still has its original 6-volt fuel gauge sensor, and it works just fine. Why? Because a fuel gauge sensor its only purpose is to measure resistance to ground. And that resistance to ground changes with the level of the float and everything in the tank, but it doesn't really matter if it's 6-volt or 12-volt. It works perfectly fine. It's just measuring the resistance to ground. And actually, it's hooked up to a 1935 fuel tank sensors hooked to a set of Dakota digital gauges, and it reads accurate. So it's like, it does it. A lot of 6-volt things will work with 12-volt, but I always urge people, test it first. Test it, out in the open. Don't just assume this is working fine. But for the most part, a lot of 6-volt stuff. What won't work good is light bulbs.
Light bulbs, I was going to say. Don't try a light bulb.
Light bulbs do not work good going from 6-volt to 12. They work good for a couple minutes. Second. And then they're really dim after that. Of course, my laptop here is suddenly gone to sleep.
It didn't.
Tommy writes, I'm a new member, and I'm hoping to see a video on how to install windlace. I have done headliners in Mustang, Chevelles, even a Trino, but never done one windlace. So I'm a little out of my element. I'm hoping that you have a video diagram that can help me install it. My car is a 58 Ford Fairlane 2-door hardtop. We did do a video on installing windlace into this 50s car, and it's going to be exactly kind of the same process. It's just a matter of, the windlace has little clips. The little helpful hint is to use a little bit of contact cement too. So you kind of run a little contact adhesive on there, put your windlace on after you do both the windlace and the frame itself. Put a little contact adhesive on it, put the windlace up, and then drive their little clips that go through the windlace and into the metal substructure. In some cars, you might even have like a wood tack strip or something like that in there. And just go in and, you know, make sure that not only is it mechanically fastened with either a clip or a tack, but the glue also helps make sure you have a good solid surface there. All right, we have Arthur writes he has a 1962 Chevy Nova two-door sedan. He's stripping his car to bare metal. He's got some pitted rust spots that he used navel jelly on. On rust, do you just put etching primer on rust? Do you just put etching primer on the metal, or do you have to do something else on the spots first? I think the best thing you know, there are some products like to help stabilize rust or convert rust into so it's no longer aggressive. Products like, well, if it's not going to be on the outside, products like Pour 15 are good for frame and inside door panels and stuff like that. But for the most part, yeah, you want to get all the rust out of there. As soon as the rust is gone and you're just down to pits, you know, just a good self-etch primer or epoxy primer is a good start. And then you can just, after that, then you can just finish it out like you would any other panel. Printed that one out twice. Let's see. We have let's see. Sometimes our members don't give me their name. Oh, Robert writes, I'm starting a restoration on my 63 Chevy. You know something about those.
Oh, yeah.
Most of the windows are still in good shape, but I have like calcium deposits on them. I suppose from sitting outside or exposed to water deposit, hard water, or even, you know, depending on where you live. It appears to be the surface, be on the surface, but I can't get it off with commercial cleaners. I've tried to find an article on CCR for this, but no, we have not done one on just taking off that line kind of buildup that you get. Do you have an article I can look at? No, not yet. We haven't actually that's something you run into a lot of time. Looking for advice on where to search. Yeah, we don't really have anything on this. So we haven't, you know, it's not the kind of problem that a lot of guys will run into. But to get that off, you know, you can, you know, there are some, like the commercial products, you know, the calcium lime and rust remover kind of stuff where some of that stuff will cut it. You got to watch some of that stuff. It can stain your paint, and you don't, you don't want to like get the stuff off your windows and stain your paint in the meantime. A lot of those things like the Limaways and those kind of products that can help dissolve, you know, like rain buildup, have to stay wet for a period of time. You can't just wipe them on and wipe them off. They have to, you know, and what you can do is take a little on the spray bottle and cover it with some saran wrap or something like that, because it'll keep it wet. It'll have a wet layer that can actually work on getting that stuff off. Another thing that I've used on glasses, I treat it like paint. I'll just go at it with, you know, like a really fine buffing compound in a foam pad and just kind of just start just buffing it. And a lot of times you'll find that you can, you know, even take out some minor scratches and stuff. Yeah, and it works okay. You know, I'm usually not avoiding my glass when I'm doing finished buff work. You know, it's not normally going to hurt anything if you buff it, and it actually will take off any impurities on it. We have a question. Oh, this is like a. Oh, this might be a good one for you. Or, We have a question from a member who writes. He has to change the valve stem seals on his Ford. He's got a Ford. He's got a 1970 Lincoln Mark III that he has a 460, and he wants to change the valve stem seals. And his 460 has studs on it. It's not like an arm assembly. I heard you can do that without taking off the heads. Is this true?
Yes.
Okay. How?
There is an attachment for, say, air up your cylinder
Okay.
with pneumatic.
Yep.
And you got to make sure both valves are totally shut before you take the compress the springs and take the seals, the springs out.
Yep.
But, as long as they're pressurized, they usually stay.
Okay. And I have heard that you can. I know guys that have taken like their compression tester and wired and taken the part that threads into the spark plug and added like a Schrader valve to it. To that would be like a valve like you would have on a tire, so they can actually. Sorry about that, guys. I have to have my phone on because it's the way my producer gets a hold of me, but apparently it's also a way people can send me random phone calls in the middle of the event. When you air up the cylinder, the first thing it's going to want to do is push that cylinder all the way to the bottom of the stroke.
Right.
Of course, both the valves will be closed at the bottom of the stroke.
Yeah.
But then you got to keep pressure on it.
Constantly.
Until you finish your work on so you just kind of basically hook it up to your compressor, keep the air there.
Keep your pressure on at all times, and then compress the spring.
Compress the spring, remove the spring, replace the seal.
Yep. And then you should be able to just
reassemble everything.
Put your clips back in.
But you'll need a spring compressor tool that works off the top end. If you've got studs, if you've got rocker studs, there are some that thread onto those.
Take the rocker arm off.
Because you need to compress the valve springs far enough to get the keepers off.
Yep.
Then you can pull, the washer and everything's off at that point. And you can service the seals. But yeah, I've heard over the years guys trying lots of different things too. Threading rope and stuff into the into the cylinders, and a lot of that stuff. I say no, don't do that. Don't be putting stuff in your cylinders. That's how you end up having to pull your heads off later on.
Yeah.
But I'm sure I'll get some response where somebody's going to say, "Oh no, I've done that all the time." Okay, next question we have. This comes from a member, Henry asked, are you looking for info? Might there be someone who makes a smaller steering wheel to go on a 57, goes the wheel to go on a 57 or 58 Ford? And I think the stock ones are the stock ones are big because the steering on these on these 50s cars they use the same wheel for power steering and manual steering and just the steering themselves was just like it was they called it Armstrong steering for a reason because it was tough steering them old cars without power steering, and even the ones with power steering at that time, some of the early power steerings were, they overdid it where it was like, you can turn it with your little finger and you almost lose the feel of the road. But for the guys who don't want like this massive wheel, there wasn't a lot of choices. I know for like the Thunderbirds, because those cars are kind of hard to get in and out of, they do make a reproduction wheel that looks just like the original, but it's like smaller. I'm not aware of a factory-looking wheel
That's in a smaller
diameter, but
so.
don't take my word on it. The guys there's always some steering wheel manufacturer out there, and there's some really great wheels out there that don't look like a modern wheel. Check around. I know Contour has some. It's CON2R has some great looking wheels. There's also some other manufacturers that have some great, CPP has some wheels that have that retro feel to them. So you can get a smaller wheel, still fits the character of the car without having to, nothing worse than, I hate seeing a 50s car where it's got like, an aluminum spoke wood rim wheel in there, and it always looks like so out of place. It's like, it's like, no, they shouldn't have that wheel. So, always think about whenever you're accessorizing anything on your car, think about how it fits in with everything else you do.
Exactly.
How many times have you gone to a car show where it's like, you look at the steering wheel and that's like, well, it's interesting looking fit for the car, and then you look at the stereo system, the speaker grills in the back look like, some sort of, something out of an alien spacecraft or something.
Real classic looking.
So, that's for sure. Whenever you're designing any car, modifications are okay, but keep in mind the look you're after for your car, and make sure that I'm not saying you can't use modern stuff in your car, but make it part of a theme. Make it part of a theme so everything kind of goes together.
Yep.
Okay, we have another gentleman. He's asked Richard, he writes, he has a 1949 Studebaker Land Cruiser. He's doing a complete 100% stock frame-off restoration. Wow. This car has rear suicide doors with vent windows. I have all new rubber for everything on the car except the rear door vent seals. They seem to be totally obsolete and not reproduced. My old vent windows and rubber seals have a few cracks in them. Is there any way of repairing the cracks, or how can I get them off the car without more damage? But I'd only want to take them off if you know someone who reproduces seals, maybe from the originals. Also, my seats have saggy coil springs, and coils used have both ends twisted back into themselves. They're various lengths and also have different thicknesses of wire. Can't find this type. Any suggestions on where I can find, he's got a few questions, on a 6-volt positive ground electronic ignition for my distributor. It is an Autolite distributor. Let's address a few of these questions individually. As far as the positive ground, negative ground, going back into the 30s and later 30s and 40s and even into the 50s, some cars were positive ground, negative. And what I've always done on every car that I had that was positive ground is switched it to negative ground, and everything works fine. Sometimes you have to repolarize your generator, but that's the extent of it. The gauges still work fine. Everything, the lights and everything else will work fine. I've got a 31 DeSoto. I think we've got some videos on the site where I brought that. But that, the very first thing I did with that is switch that car from positive ground to negative ground. And a lot of times, everything will be just fine.
Yeah.
And the benefits by switching is then, you don't have to, there's like a lot of things you don't have to worry about somebody jumping your car and automatically thinking
Burning it up.
and burning the things up. Kind of like left and right hand threaded lug nuts,
Yeah.
like this car had all left hand threaded lug nuts, all right hand thread now, just because whenever anybody because it's like such a weird, quirky thing. And I know the Mopar purists will all like, what?
You didn't change that over.
But it's the kind of thing that opens itself up to problems because, if you get stuck on the side of the road and some, young kid comes to, change out a tire or whatever the circumstance is, you'll end up with broken lug nut or studs and otherwise. And the same with positive ground. And I know now that I've done blasphemy, yes, you can stick with your positive ground if you're dead set on it. But it's one of the first things that I convert over is I switch everything to negative ground. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, things like electronic ignition kits are suddenly available because they don't, everything is sort of designed around that. But let's go back up. Let's go to seals, quarter window seals. You run into that all the time, especially, if you're working on something other than a Chevy or a Ford,
yeah,
or, in some like Mopars, you can, on the very common cars, most, you're working on a 55, 57 Chevy, you're going to be able to go to like half a dozen catalogs and order all the rubber seals and everything you're going to need. If you're working on a 49 Studebaker Land Cruiser, they're going to be parts that you can't source anywhere. You can always hope that there's some purist, some fanatic out there who's has such a passion for these cars that he's going to invest of his own time to manufacture a seal. But those people are few and far between that have the skills to do that, and not all marks are represented equally. So sometimes what you got to do is find a seal that's close. And sometimes you have to find 2 or 3 seals that, I've taken cars where
something similar.
Where I had like, okay, for the bottom part of this windshield seal, this is the correct profile, so that'll work, but the sides aren't right. And you end up, and then you find another molding that has the right contour that you can use for the sides, and taking super glue and gluing them together. Yeah, super glue works good if you get a good clean cut and good seal. Super glue does a good job I've got rubber that I've glued together 30 years ago that is still together. It's taking the time, make sure you have good clean cuts, make sure that, you get them, sealed tightly together. And, I've been known to, hold the seal together for 10 minutes and watch TV or do, listen to the radio or something until that, gets good and seated together. Then I don't have to worry about it. So sometimes, you're not always going to find the seals that you need, especially when you're working on odd brands. And I've built enough odd brand cars over the years that I'm familiar with, having to, figure out ways to make it work. And also go online, and kind of go to those groups that just deal with Studebakers. Those guys can sometimes, they can take some of the legwork out of it for you because they've done it for their 49 Land Cruiser and said, hey, here's a seal. If I use, this seal from this car and this seal from this car and cut and join, you got a new set of seals. There's nothing like a new set of seals. I usually try to replace all the rubber in my car just because there's nothing worse than having dried, hard, cracked up rubber. You get the car, you go, oh, well, geez, I can't find anything new. And then when you get the car all done, you still look at it and it's like, it's all about the details. What separates a great restoration from a good restoration is the attention to the details and things like the rubber parts. You're probably money ahead, finding a good replacement for them seals than you are trying to preserve the looks of the seal that's in there. Is there any way to in one case, I had a seal where it was, again, it was something like a quarter window seal where I just took a thin rubber and I just bonded it right over the top of the seal that was in there to give me the look that I wanted. But it was a case where the seal was so unique and everything else that I finally just gave up and said, well, there's something I got to do to make it look better. So it's not a fix. And hard seals aren't going to seal. Hard seals aren't going to keep water out. Hard seals aren't going to keep wind out. Hard seals are hard seals. You're better off replacing them. From my own experience, like I said, I've kind of jerry rigged a few. I've coated stuff with spray on, seal it. Filled the cracks in my rubber with silicones and sprayed them with like Plastidip and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it looks better, but it's not right. It's not.
And usually, if they're cracked, they're hard.
Yeah, and
They're
that's
already
why
hard.
they crack. Usually, is because they're drying out and they're shrinking, and
Yep.
so the best thing to do is to replace them or figure out a way to replace them. And if that's using seals from other cars or trimming and cutting and making other seals work, go that route. You'll be happier in the end. And what was his last? There was one more item on here. I think. Oh, the seat spring thing.
Yeah.
Talk to your upholstery guys.
Yep.
These guys run into this stuff all the time, and I know guys want to always solve all the problems themselves in their shop, but upholstery guys are going to know what he can do and can't do, and what I know from my own experience. We've run into cars where we've like springs are broken or collapsed or but a lot of upholstery guys have run into this stuff day in and day out. They have the sources, they know what they have for resources available. So that would be my recommendation with the seat springs. I have gone to junkyards and found similar years, models and stuff, and usually the seat spring, the seats up here in Minnesota, everything, if the glass is still in the car, the interior might be fine, but otherwise, you open the door, but even if the interior, if the glass is in the car, every vermin known to mankind in some of your salvage yard cars is like taken and made nests and everything else.
Yeah.
But I have pulled the seat springs, most vintage salvage yards will, sell you a set of old just springs, pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
And even if you're just going to use it for parts, it can come in handy. But it's just a matter of searching out the things. Where I'd start talking to my upholstery guy first, see what they say. Recently watched a video on installing pre-molded carpet. It showed a gentleman installing the carpet using a small handheld steamer. That must have been you.
Yeah.
To help smooth out the carpet, my question is, where can I get the steamer like the one we use? Whenever you're doing any upholstery stuff, steam is the way to go. You never want to use a heat gun. Never use a heat gun on upholstery. Quickest way to ruin carpet. Quickest way to ruin a headliner. Quickest way to ruin any vinyl is put a dry heat gun on it. So you want to always use steam. There is when you look at steamers, there's a couple different kinds. There's like these big steamers that look like a big kettle that have all kinds of hoses and everything else. Those are good for drapes. Those are good for something like that. For auto upholstery stuff, you want as much heat real close to where you're working you don't want that steam to have to go pass through a bunch of hoses to get, you want it as much heat. So we use the small, it's called the E-Steam. I think it's a Jiffy E-Steam is the one we use. And it was purchased like at Walmart or something like that. It's not hard to find. But what we like about the small handheld ones is it's boiling the water, it's creating the steam right there. It's traveling this far before it gets out. So it's giving us the maximum amount of heat. It's small and you're not dealing with a bunch of hoses and all that kind of stuff. So it does a good job. So, but the idea is to get the heat, the water keeps it from getting overheated, but the idea is to get the heat as close to the material, so you're not losing the heat and as soon as you lose the heat, then that becomes the you're not going to be able to get the wrinkles out of carpet. It takes a fair amount of heat to actually relax out carpet and stuff like that. It's always a good idea if you're doing it. It's not always possible, but what we do here is sometimes we'll just throw the carpet out in the driveway and let the sun shine on it for a while, and that will usually kind of warm things up and
especially black.
Black carpets warm up real quick. All right, we have Rick asks. He's got a 1970 Chrysler Newport Convertible. There's a big car.
Yeah, that's a big car.
The taillight lenses do not have a seal to keep the moisture out. What is a good material to use to make a gasket seal with? And the big thing here is you want to use a closed cell foam. You don't want to use like just foam because that'll suck up moisture and wick it into your thing. You want to use a closed cell, and you can go to upholstery supply places will have it, but you can also get it at you can get rolls of closed cell foam at Home Depot or Lowe's, and they use it in, they use it in like roofing and those kinds of applications where they need like foams for seals on vents and stuff like that. But if you go to Lowe's website and type in closed cell foam rubber, you'll find that you can get it in sheets, or you can go to like the online auction sites, they'll have it too. But usually like the stuff they sell at at Lowe's, it comes in like a 4x6 roll for like $20, and you can make a lot of gaskets out of a 4x6 roll. And especially for a car like a 70 Chrysler Newport, those are some big taillights. And it's going to be a matter of you're going to have to draw on it and cut out your own gasket. There's still some handiwork involved, but using a closed cell foam, that it's not going to wick moisture, and you'll be able to get a good seal, and you'll be able to get the lens up there tight without causing it to crack or anything against the body. Do you have instructions on how to, or just another member writes, do you have instructions on how to adjust the door glass on a 66 Impala SS?
Depending on where, is he adjusting side to side or?
Yeah, well, there's really a few adjustments that can be made. One of the biggest adjustments is usually the glass to rock forward and back, and those are slotted screws on the actual mechanism itself. that sometimes, the in and out, there are rollers or rub strips, and I'm not sure on it. I'm not specific on a 66 Impala. I'm not sure. I'd have to do a little bit of research, but and maybe that harkens to another point. Um, in the shop here, one of our biggest friends, one of the most useful tools in the shop is the factory service manuals. If you get a factory service manual, you can, they'll go into depth telling you exactly what, how to take something apart or how to adjust it. They're big on adjustment and factory service manual because, that's one of the customers' complaints is, hey, my window doesn't go upright, or it's leaking water or something.
Yeah.
So, in one of those, the great thing about nowadays is so much of the factory service manuals are reproduced and are available on DVDs, and you can like search them, and for little money you can have a DVD with all of your with all of the factory service manual on it, and it's searchable, and you can do it without ever getting anything dirty, and it's without having to buy an original factory service manual either. One source that I use for that is like Faxon Literature. If you just internet search Faxon Literature, you'll find that they have like tons and tons of factory service manuals at a reasonable price too. Okay, Larry asks, I have a 1958 Chevy Apache truck that always that always wants to be primed at the carb to get it to start. So he's pouring gas in the car. Sounds like it.
Yep.
I changed the fuel pump, the fuel filter. No, the fuel filter is a glass bowl. The carb, but it is still not. It still does not want to keep fuel. So it's draining back down. So when you go to start it, even if you pump the accelerator and pull the choke, it is really hard to get it started. So he's got to refill the whole system. Any assistance in this matter would help. It's like the fuel does not stay in and drains back out of the carb. Very frustrated. Put on a new carb and adjusted as per the paperwork. Please help. Okay, so Larry, I suspect what's happening here is there's a check inside your fuel pump itself. Your pump is just it has a diaphragm that when it comes down, it sucks fuel in from the tank, and when it goes up, it pushes it up into the carb. And how does it accomplish that? It doesn't just push it back and forth. There's two check valves on the fuel pump. They're usually inside the fuel pump, and one lets the fuel in this way when it sucks down, and the other one that goes up to your carburetor. So when it pushes back up again, it closes that check valve that goes to the back gas tank and opens the one that goes to the carburetor. What can happen sometimes, and it's unfortunate that some of the like cheaper rebuilt or remanufactured fuel pumps, these check valves get stuck or they're not there, and I've even seen cases where they're not there. And what happens is, but the fact that it keeps running, it tells me what's happening is that upper one, that the upper one where that is it the upper? It's the one that. Well, anyway,
it would be on the upper.
Yeah, they're not sealing. So what happens is it starts to drain back. It siphons back out of the carb. You can drop a check valve inline. That would be my first thought. first thing that I'd want to check. And you can buy check valves. It can even though you've replaced the fuel pump, and I suspect maybe you replaced it because you were having this problem. My next thought would be, that there's something going on. In order for that to drain out, the fuel has to go somewhere. The fuel.
As long as the floats are shut, how you're going to pull the fuel back out of the carburetor.
Yeah, because usually the fuel drops in high, and it's not going to suck back out unless it's draining into the intake.
Then you have to get some air pocket where it can suck air.
Yeah. Well, the bowl would be vented normally.
Right, but you're.
Carb is above the fuel level.
The fuel.
So then the thought would be, in order for that to go dry, it's got to be draining into the intake, and it's got to be coming through the carb. So then my thought is, okay, so what is, why is that draining through? What is not checking, how is that getting through?
And the only way is if let's say your floats are, it's not closing it off.
Yep.
So then you're overflowing into the, after you shut it off, you're draining gas into it, and the float come down enough to where it sucks air back in and out of it, to get the gas line drained. I don't know how else you would get.
The only other thing that, I don't like the glass bowl fuel filters just because they're prone to suck air into them, and they're prone to, because it's just a little cork gasket that mounts between the glass bowl and, to me, it's like, I know a lot of, this one had one on it. And it worked fine. I know some guys that say to mount those things up. Normally the glass bowl goes down, it becomes a sediment bowl, because that's what the glass bowl is for. It's a sediment bowl, so you can see if there's any rust or dirt or whatever in there. But some guys have problems with those, so they turn them upside down so they don't get like vapor lock and stuff from. And then it becomes less of a fuel or sediment bowl. There's still a screen in there, and there's still a filter element in there. So it still functions as a filter. It gets rid of the sediment bowl quality to it, but that's not a big issue. I contend the best thing to do is get rid of that darn thing, because I've had nothing but trouble with them, and try it at least. Put in. There's a few things you can try. If you try just replacing that, putting an inline, just a regular fuel filter that you can buy down at any auto parts store, try that. See if that solves your problem. If that's your problem, then you need to address something there.
Or an inline check valve.
You can try that. You can try. There's a few things you can try. Which is, I guess, would be my approach to it. I would try. I would try the fuel filter. I would try a check valve. I would try, and see what solves it. Just don't change everything. Just try one thing, and just kind of be methodical about it, and you'll figure out. Eventually you're going to find what's causing it, and then it'll be like, geez, why didn't I think of that? And then let us know too. It's always good to hear.
Exactly.
When guys run into that kind of stuff, what they found to resolve it. It's always helpful information.
Yep.
All right. We have a member who's wrote in. It says, his name's Mark. Must be a smart guy. I have a 67 Mustang with a modified 289 V8. It has a quick fuel 600 CFM carb, MSD ignition. and an MSD. It has a mechanical fuel pump. In warmer weather, there is a misfire, a breakup at higher RPM. There also a noticeable stumble upon initial acceleration. Is the fuel atomizing before it hits the carb? I'd appreciate your opinion on this. Thanks. What's your first thought?
I wouldn't think so unless it's really hot.
Yeah, I'm not thinking. Well, my first thought when he says it starts
weather.
when in warmer weather is a misfire, a breakup at higher RPM. Funny that it would be just temperature related, but at higher RPMs, I don't know what he's done to modify his 289. 600 CFM carb is pretty much maxed out. Is a lot of carb for a 289. So maybe a wide open. I don't know if it's wide open throttle or if he's getting too much fuel at that point.
You'd be able to tell, I would think, by
there's a misfire at higher RPMs. There's also a noticeable stumble upon initial. They may be two totally unrelated conditions. Your stumble on initial acceleration it sounds like fuel pump kind of issue or timing.
Or timing, I would say advance. Some kind of advance is not working right.
Yep. And he does have, the MSD ignition, that's just going to, give you stronger spark.
Depending on what he's run for a distributor also,
And he doesn't say what distributor he has, but assuming he's putting he must be running an HEI distributor because he's got the MSD box on it.
But it does have an advanced elite or,
Yeah. So if you've got an MSD, it may be something with your the springs on your advanced curve. Maybe you want to try a lighter spring, or you may be because you may not be reaching that point where your advance has matched the curve. The advanced curve has matched what your engine needs at that point. So if you I would, if you can adjust depending on what your distributor is, if you can adjust your advance curve on your distributor, might be a good thing to do.
Yep.
And as far as the stumbling off ignition, 90% of the time is related to
advance. I would say advance or
either your timing,
your accelerator pump,
or your accelerator pump. That's, from my experience, it's the two things that will cause a car to stumble off idle more than anything else.
Yeah, and they have different cams for your accelerators also.
Yeah, depending on the carb.
I know Holly does. I don't know about Quick Fuels.
Like a Holly carb has different cams that control the rate at which your accelerator pump kicks in, and it depending on what carb you're running. That's the kind of thing where it using a different cam, and they're pretty inexpensive. But by changing the rate in which the fluid is, the gas is dumped into your cylinder on the initial hit of the accelerator, can greatly affect how your car performed off idle.
Yep.
Okay, guys. Thanks for joining us here tonight. Really appreciate you guys coming by. If you have additional questions, feel free to ask. Again, thanks for coming out. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter down below. And, as soon as you sign up for that, you'll stay in, you'll get the Overdrive newsletter that'll keep you in touch with, late breaking news or events or anything that's going on with the club. So it's a good thing to have. Again, thanks for stopping by. Appreciate it.